When I showed my safe with $400,000 in savings to my wife, she disappeared the next morning. No goodbye. No explanations. Just a cold silence, an empty house, and a safe that was no longer there. But what she didn't know changed everything. She thought she stole my life's work, that she'd walked away holding the crown jewel of my sacrifice. What she didn't realize was that the safe she took wasn't the prize. It was a prop. A decoy. A piece of bait I had quietly placed years ago, for a betrayal I had silently prepared for. I didn't chase her. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I smiled. Because in that moment, I knew I had just watched the opening scene of a story that would end very, very differently than she had planned. And that's exactly what this story is about, how a man like me got betrayed by the one person I trusted most, and how I turned that betrayal into something far greater than revenge. If this touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments. Thank you for spending a little of your time here with us. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this with a brother who needs to hear this. Healing isn't weakness, it's strength. And now, let's dive into the story. My name is David Mitchell. I'm 52 years old, born and raised in the quiet suburbs of Denver, Colorado. I've never been the flashy type. I didn't grow up with wealth. My father was a machinist, my mother a school lunch lady. Life taught me early on that if you wanted something, you earned it, no shortcuts, no handouts. I worked my way through college, paid off every dollar of student debt, and built a steady career as a mechanical engineer. I was never the guy driving the latest car or throwing money around at happy hours. I was the guy staying late at work, fixing busted valves, mentoring the interns, and putting a few extra dollars into a savings account every month. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Every dime I saved came from hard work, skipped vacations, and Friday nights spent under the hood of a second-hand truck instead of dining in overpriced restaurants. And then there was Lena. We met when I was 38, and she was 29, bright, beautiful, magnetic. She worked in event marketing, always surrounded by people, always moving fast. I was slower, more grounded, more reserved. Opposites, in every sense. But she brought color into my world. She made me laugh, pushed me out of my routines, and reminded me life wasn't just about paychecks and plans. At least, that's what I believed at the time. After 13 years together, our lives had settled into a rhythm, comfortable, familiar, and, I thought, strong. Sure, there were quiet moments where I noticed Lena pulling away a little, more trips alone, longer silences, vague answers to simple questions, but I chalked it up to stress or burnout. After all, every relationship hits plateaus, right? Still, in my heart, I believed we were in it together. That's why the day I opened that safe in our bedroom and showed her the fruits of my life's work felt so important. I had spent over a decade saving that $400,000. I'd skipped every upgrade, passed on every luxury, ignored every impulse to splurge. That money wasn't just numbers on paper, it was proof. Proof that all my years of sacrifice had meant something. It was a promise I had made to myself, to build something real, something lasting, for us. I remember the way Lena stood there when I opened the safe. She stared at the stacks of neatly bound bills like she was seeing something unreal. She smiled, leaned in, kissed my cheek softly, and whispered, "You really did it." I smiled too. Because in that moment, I thought I was sharing a future. I didn't know I was handing her the bait. I'd spent most of my adult life working in silence. No spotlight, no applause, just early mornings, steel-toed boots, and the quiet grind of building something that mattered. Every hour of overtime, every weekend I skipped hanging out with friends, every little sacrifice, I did it all for a future I believed in. I wasn't chasing luxury, I was chasing stability, peace of mind, and the quiet dignity of knowing I had built a life with my own two hands. That $400,000 didn't just represent money, it was every decision I'd made right, every temptation I'd resisted, every long day that ended with me too tired to even turn on the TV. I didn't grow up in wealth. My parents taught me how to stretch a dollar, how to fix things instead of replacing them, how to find value in reliability rather than flash. That stuck with me. Over the years, I became the guy who didn't need much but gave his all. And through it all, Lena was there, or at least, I thought she was. From the outside, we looked solid. We had a modest home, dinner together most nights, shared routines, a few inside jokes. I genuinely thought we were growing old together. I had pictured us traveling someday, maybe downsizing to a small cabin near a lake, living out our quiet dreams. That's what the money was for, to buy us time, freedom, a life without worry. I thought she understood that. I thought she was part of that vision. But somewhere along the line, things started to shift. It was subtle at first. A few extra hours at work, unanswered texts, a strange coldness in her voice when she said she was just tired. I brushed it off. People go through phases, right? But then the gaps grew wider. She stopped asking about my day. She started spending more time on her phone, always flipping it face down when I walked into the room. Calls she'd take in a different room, voices lowered behind closed doors, laughter I wasn't part of. And it wasn't just distance, it was detachment. Like she was slowly unplugging from our life. I started noticing how she'd flinch slightly when I reached for her hand, or how her eyes wandered past me during conversations, like she was searching for something else, someone else. I wanted to believe it was just stress, that maybe we'd reconnect after a short vacation or more time together. But deep down, a voice I didn't want to listen to had already started whispering the truth. I remember that night so vividly it still replays in my mind like a scene from a film I never asked to be in. I'd spent weeks debating whether to show Lena the safe. It wasn't just about the money, it was about what it represented. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd denied myself, everything I'd dreamed of giving us. I had kept it hidden for years, tucked away behind a false wall in our bedroom closet, sealed tight with a biometric lock. It wasn't just about security, it was about privacy, about protecting something sacred. But that evening, something in me wanted to share it. Maybe it was the way she'd been so distant lately, maybe I hoped it would bring us closer again, or maybe I just wanted her to see that after all the years of silent grinding, I'd finally arrived at something real. When the door swung open and the soft light hit those stacks of cash, I felt something rise in me, pride, relief, hope. I turned to look at her, expecting joy, maybe a tear, maybe that smile she used to give me when she was truly proud. She stepped forward, eyes wide, lips parted just slightly. "You really did it," she said, almost in a whisper, and she wrapped her arms around me. Her touch was gentle, affectionate. But something about it felt rehearsed. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Her voice had a strange calm to it, like she was observing the moment from a distance instead of feeling it. I pushed the thought away. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was just being too sensitive. I kissed her forehead, whispered that this was for both of us, for everything we had built. She nodded quietly. I didn't see the storm behind her eyes. The next morning, the silence in the house felt unnatural. I woke up alone in our bed, the sheets beside me undisturbed, still neat from the night before. I called out her name once, then again, louder. No response. I got up, walked through the hallway, checked the kitchen, the living room, nothing. No note on the fridge, no coffee on the counter, no purse on the chair where she usually tossed it. Then I noticed the bedroom closet door was slightly ajar. My heart sank as I stepped closer. The wall panel was pulled open. The safe, gone. Just gone. My pulse pounded in my ears as I scanned the room, desperate for some kind of explanation. And then I saw it, a single sheet of paper folded neatly on the nightstand. I picked it up, hands already shaking. Her handwriting, delicate and precise, stared back at me in cold ink. "I gave everything to this marriage. That money was always mine too. Don't bother looking for me." That was it. No apology. No remorse. Just a final slap of entitlement before she vanished. I stood there, paper in hand, staring at the hollow space where the safe had been. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Everything we'd built, everything I thought we shared, reduced to an empty room and a cruel note. But then, slowly, a strange calm settled in. I looked down at the letter again, and I smiled. Because while she thought she had taken everything, I knew the truth. That safe wasn't the treasure. It was the trap. I stood there in the stillness, the note in my hand, the hollow space in the wall staring back at me like an open wound. And yet, there was no shouting, no smashing of furniture, no storm of rage tearing through the house. Just silence. A silence that wrapped around me like a second skin. It should have broken me. It should have shattered every piece of me. But it didn't. I just stood there, breathing slowly, feeling something else take root inside me, an eerie calm, a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Maybe because I had seen this coming, not exactly like this, but close enough. The distance in her eyes, the casual lies, the way her affection had slowly turned into obligation. I'd tried to ignore it, tried to pretend it was just a phase. But somewhere deep down, I had already started preparing for the possibility that one day, Lena would choose something else over us. That's the thing about people who live with discipline, we don't just save money, we save options. I folded the note carefully and placed it back on the nightstand. There was no point calling her. No point chasing. She thought she'd won. She thought she had blindsided me. But she had only walked into a scenario I had quietly prepared long ago. That safe she took wasn't real, not in the way she thought it was. What she carried out of this house was a steel box filled with decoy stacks, counterfeit bills printed on high-grade paper, and a few documents that meant nothing. It was a ruse, a performance piece in a play she didn't even realize she was cast in. The real money? That had been moved out of reach a long time ago. Years back, after a close friend of mine lost everything in a divorce that turned brutal, I'd started thinking differently. Not cynically, just smart. I opened a discreet offshore trust under a different name, one that couldn't be traced back easily. I funneled the money slowly over time, bonuses, investment gains, profits from a side project I never even told Lena about. Every dollar was logged, protected, and secured in a place no one but me could access. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. I didn't want to believe I'd need it, but I wasn't going to be caught unguarded. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to leave my life exposed to a storm I could feel brewing. And now here we were, storm unleashed, house quiet, safe gone, but I was still standing. Because unlike her, I hadn't bet everything on a lie. Looking back now, the signs had been flashing in front of me for months, I just didn't want to see them. There were moments, little ones, that didn't make sense at the time but now burned bright in my memory. Like the day I got a notification from the bank about an attempted login to one of my old accounts, one I hadn't used in years. The message said it had been flagged for unusual activity, but when I brought it up to Lena, she dismissed it casually, saying maybe it was just a system error. Another time, I noticed a withdrawal from a joint account we barely used. When I asked about it, she said she'd used it to buy something for the house, but I never saw any new furniture, no upgrades, nothing changed. There was also a moment, maybe 2 weeks before she disappeared, when I caught a glimpse of her phone screen lighting up late at night. The name on the message was someone I didn't recognize. When I asked, she quickly locked the screen and said it was just work stuff. But her tone was off, clipped and cold. And then there were the phone calls, quiet whispers behind closed doors, laughter that stopped the moment I walked into the room, followed by that forced smile, the kind people wear when they've already made a decision they haven't told you about yet. The first person I called after she vanished was Ray. He was more than a friend, he was family, someone who'd stood beside me since college. A man I trusted with my life, the kind you can count on when everything else falls apart. When he walked into the house and saw the empty wall where the safe had been, he didn't say much at first. He just looked at me, nodded once, then sat down with that calm, steady presence he'd always carried. "So, she finally pulled the trigger, huh?" he said quietly. I nodded. He didn't ask if I was okay, he knew I wasn't. But he didn't press either. He just listened as I laid out everything: the note, the missing safe, the offshore account, the years of suspicion I'd buried under hope. He didn't offer pity. He offered something better: clarity. "Then we do this smart," he said. "We don't get angry. We get ahead." I could have let the betrayal eat me alive. I could have spent my days spiraling in bitterness, drowning in what-ifs and could-have-beens. But rage is a fire that burns everything, including the person holding the match. I wasn't going to play that game. I wasn't going to chase Lena, scream into the void, or throw punches at ghosts. I was going to do what I'd always done: plan. Methodically. Quietly. Precisely. With Ray by my side, I started rebuilding not with emotion, but with strategy. First, we traced everything: every shared account, every past transaction, every connection Lena might use to try and legitimize the money she thought she stole. Then we started documenting. We pulled old conversations, emails, call logs, anything that hinted at what she'd been planning before she disappeared. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wanted leverage. Proof. Control. The kind of control that doesn't just take back what's yours, it exposes what never belonged to them in the first place. Ray was the one who found it first. He'd installed a discreet surveillance system in my house years ago, a precautionary favor during a time when there had been a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. I had almost forgotten about it, but Ray hadn't. He asked me if I had ever checked the footage from the day Lena left. I hadn't. I hadn't even thought about it. Maybe part of me didn't want to see her walking out of the house with that safe. Maybe I didn't want to watch the moment everything collapsed. But Ray insisted, and we pulled up the files together. The timestamp showed late evening, hours after I had gone to bed. There she was, Lena, in the hallway, walking with purpose. Dressed in black, hair tied back, face set in a cold, mechanical calm. Not a trace of guilt, not even hesitation. She moved like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. But she wasn't alone. There was a man behind her. At first, the angle didn't give us much, just a profile, a blur of motion as he helped her lift the safe. But as the footage shifted to the camera by the door, his face came into view. And my stomach dropped. My jaw tightened. I paused the screen, leaned in closer, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I knew that face. Every detail. Every line. It was Ethan. Ray's younger brother. The same Ethan I had mentored fresh out of college, the kid I gave his first job, the one I vouched for when no one else would. The same kid who sat at my dinner table countless times, who played poker with us on weekends, who once called me his second big brother. And now he was in my house, helping Lena steal what he damn well knew wasn't his. Ray didn't say a word at first. He just stared at the screen, his hands clenched tight, jaw locked. He hit rewind, watched the footage again, slower this time, like he needed confirmation of what his eyes were already screaming. "That bastard," he muttered, voice low and shaking with something between fury and heartbreak. I sat there in silence, feeling a different kind of pain settle in my chest. Betrayal from a wife was one thing. But betrayal from someone you saw as family, that carved deeper. That changed everything. I didn't say much after that. I couldn't. The image of Ethan standing in my house, right next to her, carrying that safe like it was some victory prize, I couldn't shake it. I sat there in the same chair, the same room where I'd once talked about building a future, where I'd shared beers with him, laughed about old stories, gave him advice like he was blood. And now those memories felt tainted, poisoned by something far worse than loss. It was betrayal, pure and simple. And it hit me harder than I thought it would. I didn't even feel angry at first. I just felt hollow, like someone had taken a crowbar to my chest and pried out everything I believed about trust. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands tangled in my hair, and tried to breathe through the heaviness pressing down on my ribs. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't even about Lena. It was about everything I thought I understood about loyalty, about the people I let into my life, about the blind spots I didn't know I had. 1,000 conversations replayed in my head, times Ethan had looked me in the eye, laughed with me, thanked me for giving him a shot. Was all of it fake? Or was it something darker, something calculated, twisted, opportunistic from the start? The worst part wasn't the theft. It wasn't even the deception. It was the intimacy of it all, the closeness, the familiarity, the way betrayal like that doesn't come from strangers but from people who knew exactly where to cut. I sat there for what felt like hours, swallowed in silence, until Ray finally spoke. "You don't deserve this, man," he said quietly. But I didn't answer. Because in that moment, I wasn't sure what I deserved anymore. All I knew was that I'd been wrong, about her, about him, about everything I thought was solid. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel before, not just sadness, not just shock, but grief. The kind that breaks you from the inside out. And I knew I couldn't sit in it forever. But for a little while, I let myself fall apart. Ray sat across from me, his fingers pressed against his temples, eyes staring blankly at the paused screen where Ethan's face still glared like a scar that wouldn't fade. I'd known Ray for decades and I'd seen him angry before, fuming at a bad call during a football game, cursing at a broken engine, even once throwing a wrench across his garage in frustration. But this wasn't that kind of anger. This was deeper, quieter, heavier. It was disbelief wrapped in betrayal. "I can't wrap my head around this," he said, voice low, almost like he was talking to himself. "He's my brother. My damn brother." He shook his head slowly, as if trying to shake the image away. "I raised him like a little shadow. Carried him on my back when our parents couldn't. Helped him get through school, covered for him when he messed up, pushed him into the job you gave him." He let out a bitter laugh, one that cracked midway like something inside him had split. "And this is how he pays it back? Sneaking into your house, dragging a safe out with your wife like a couple of thieves in the night?" There was pain in his eyes that had nothing to do with me, a hurt that went all the way back to childhood bonds and unspoken brotherly promises. He looked at me and said quietly, "I don't know if I'm more ashamed, or furious." And I understood exactly what he meant. Because I couldn't stop thinking about the early days either. I remembered Ethan fresh out of college, green, eager, unsure of himself but full of potential. I was the one who helped polish that edge, who gave him his first real shot. I pulled strings to get him through the door at my company, coached him on his first project, stood up for him when senior management wanted to let him go. I trusted him with trade secrets, shared dinners and holiday gatherings, treated him like the little brother I never had. He used to call me Big D with a grin, like it was some inside joke between us. Now, every one of those memories felt like a joke played on me. Each moment, once warm, now twisted into bitterness. He didn't just betray me, he dismantled every piece of trust one had ever placed in him, and worse, he knew exactly what he was doing when he did it. Ray's hands moved quickly over the keyboard, his eyes scanning lines of code and metadata as he dug deeper into Lena's old laptop, which I had nearly thrown out weeks ago. Something told me to keep it, just in case, and now I was glad I did. He bypassed the usual login protocols and unearthed a hidden folder buried in the system's backend, encrypted, but not enough to keep Ray out. What he found made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a plan to steal the safe. It was bigger. There were email threads between Lena and Ethan, each one colder than the last, dissecting the safest way to execute the heist, but also outlining how to make it look like I had orchestrated an embezzlement scheme. They drafted mock bank statements, falsified transaction trails, even created an anonymous report template they planned to send to the authorities, alleging that I'd been siphoning company funds. Their goal wasn't just to take what I had, they wanted to bury me under it. Frame me, ruin me, destroy any chance I'd ever have to recover. Lena's words in one email still echo in my head, "Once this hits, no one will believe he's the victim. He's too quiet, too calculated. They'll think it was all him from the start." And Ethan replied, "Perfect. We'll walk away clean while he's fighting charges." I sat there staring at the screen as if the words would somehow rearrange themselves, as if maybe I was misreading them. But there was no mistake. It wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated character assassination. I started to feel something unravel inside me, something quiet and frightening. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was doubting everything. Who had I become that I couldn't see this coming? Had I really misjudged Lena so deeply? Had I been so blind to the signs that I handed over every piece of myself without question? My mind went into a spiral, dragging every choice I'd made through the mud. I thought about the years I spent defending her quirks as stress, mistaking distance for distraction, excusing coldness as fatigue. I thought about all the times I told myself she was just going through something, never once thinking that I was the one being walked over. I questioned my worth, my instincts, my ability to trust anyone ever again. If I could be fooled by the people I loved most, what did that say about the man I thought I was? I spent the rest of that night staring at the ceiling, the glow of the laptop screen still lingering behind my eyelids. Everything inside me had cracked open. But somewhere between those sleepless hours and the first light of dawn, something shifted. I realized grief wasn't going to save me, and rage wasn't going to fix anything. I couldn't undo what they'd done, but I could choose how I responded to it. I had two paths in front of me: be the broken man they expected to leave behind, or become something far more dangerous, the man who smiled quietly while setting the whole game on fire from behind the curtain. And so I made a decision, not to crumble, not to retaliate in fury, but to calculate, to observe, to outmaneuver them at every turn. I wasn't going to let them know I'd figured it all out. Not yet. I was going to let them believe they'd succeeded. I'd play the role they wrote for me, grieving, humiliated, ruined, and all the while, I'd be preparing my next move. I started with whispers, subtle ones. Ray and I crafted a narrative, carefully releasing it through mutual acquaintances and old friends, the story of how Lena had blindsided me, taken everything, and left me penniless and shattered. We let people see me looking withdrawn, tired, showing up late to work, making small, calculated appearances that painted the picture of a man who had lost everything. I let my voicemail pile up, let emails go unanswered, gave off the impression of someone sinking beneath the weight of it all. And it worked. The sympathy rolled in, the questions came, and more importantly, Lena's confidence soared. Word got back to us through a friend that she had been boasting about her freedom, hinting that I was a fool who never saw it coming. She had no idea I was feeding her ego, using her own arrogance to sharpen the blade behind the scenes. I even sent her a message one night, short, pathetic, by design. I don't know how to move forward. I have nothing left. She replied in minutes. Maybe we can talk. But you need to accept it's over. I smiled reading that, because what she didn't know was that every word she wrote was being logged, every conversation stored, every piece of her smug satisfaction building toward a reckoning she'd never see coming. Ray and I knew that the key to taking Lena down wasn't just about evidence, it was about perception. We didn't need her to crash into the truth, we needed her to walk right into it thinking she owned the room. So we carefully curated a version of events that painted me as the man left in ruins. Through casual conversations, strategically placed comments at gatherings, and a few subtle online breadcrumbs, we fed the story into the social bloodstream. David got blindsided. He's completely broken. She took everything and left him with nothing. People love a tragic story, especially when it's about someone they never expected to fall apart. Sympathy came from all directions: old coworkers, distant relatives, neighbors who barely knew us but now clung to the tale like gossip candy. And we made sure Lena heard every piece of it. We let her believe the narrative because we wanted her basking in the illusion of victory. The more she believed she'd won, the less cautious she'd become. It was psychological warfare, and we were in no rush. And she took the bait, every bit of it. Within weeks, Lena was thriving in her self-made empire of triumph. She was seen with new people, attending business mixers, flaunting designer bags and hinting at secret investment deals she'd been planning long before she left me. She played the part of a woman reborn, liberated, finally living her truth. People started admiring her boldness, some even calling her brave for leaving behind a life that no longer fulfilled her. She smiled in every photo, tossed champagne in every toast, and reveled in the attention like she'd just stepped out of a prison instead of a marriage. What she didn't see What she couldn't see was that every step she took deeper into her fantasy was a step closer to the trap we were quietly building beneath her feet. Her pride was her weakness, and we were letting it swell until it became the very noose she'd tie around her own empire. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the call came through, an unknown number lighting up my phone. I let it ring twice before answering, my voice still groggy from the mental fog of a long week. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation that felt heavier than silence. Then a soft, unfamiliar voice spoke. "David, this is Margot. I'm Lena's mother." I sat up straighter, the name hitting me like a cold gust of air. I'd heard of her, of course, but never met her. Lena always painted her as distant, bitter, someone who'd walked out on their family when she was young. She never gave many details, just vague comments laced with resentment. Now here she was, calling me out of the blue. "I know this is unexpected," Margot said gently, "but I heard what happened. I know what she did to you. And I need to tell you something, because you deserve to know the truth." I stayed quiet, not knowing what to expect. Part of me wanted to hang up, but something in her tone kept me on the line. It wasn't pity, it was regret. "I've seen this before," she continued, her voice cracking slightly. "Lena didn't just wake up one day and decide to betray you. She's done this before. More than once." The words hit like a slap. I didn't speak, just listened as she slowly revealed everything Lena had tried to keep buried. According to Margot, I wasn't Lena's first mark. There had been others, 3 men, to be exact. Different cities, different careers, different timelines, but the same outcome. Lena had gotten close, earned their trust, then orchestrated financial takedowns that left them scrambling. One was an older entrepreneur who lost a business partnership because of fraudulent paperwork she planted. Another was a real estate investor whose reputation was wrecked after she used his name to forge illegal contracts. The third, well, he'd signed a non-disclosure agreement after a messy court battle she narrowly escaped. Margot told me she tried to stop her once, years ago, but Lena cut her off, threatened her with legal action, said she'd ruin her. "She's charming, intelligent, and ruthless," Margot said. "She builds a story so well that no one ever sees the twist until it's too late. But you're different. You're the first one who might be able to stop her." After I hung up the phone with Margot, I sat in stunned silence, the weight of everything she said settling on me like a dense fog. For a long time, I had believed I was just the unlucky husband who got blindsided. But now I saw it clearly, I wasn't just part of a failed marriage. I was part of a much larger, much darker pattern. Lena hadn't simply drifted away from our relationship or fallen out of love. She had followed the same script she'd used before, refined it, sharpened it, perfected it. I wasn't her first betrayal, I was just her latest target in a string of calculated takedowns. Suddenly, everything made sense in a way that chilled me. The speed, the precision, the confidence she carried when she left, it wasn't spontaneous, it was rehearsed. And the worst part wasn't just what she had done to me, it was knowing how many others she had buried before me. How many men had been left in the ruins of her ambition, silenced by shame or legal threats while she moved on unscathed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing the house, wrestling with a decision that twisted me up from the inside out. Do I take everything I had now, every email, every document, every piece of evidence, and go to the authorities? Or do I expose her another way? Let the public see the truth, let the people who once admired her witness the real Lena unravel piece by piece. Part of me wanted justice served cold, legal and final. Another part wanted to crush her in the court of public perception, to make sure no one ever trusted her again. But I hesitated. Was this still about justice, or had I started slipping into revenge? Ray saw the war playing out in my eyes before I even said a word. He poured us both a drink and sat across from me, calm and steady. "You've got everything you need to bury her," he said. "Not just for you, but for those other guys she ruined. You're the only one who's ever stood a chance at stopping her. So don't second-guess it now. End it, for all of us." Lena had always been a master of image, and now she was preparing for her biggest performance yet. Word had spread that she was hosting an exclusive investor event at one of the city's upscale hotels, a sleek, high-rise venue filled with polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and just enough pretension to make it all feel important. Invitations were sent to venture capitalists, real estate developers, and wealthy socialites who had no idea they were walking into a mirage. The pitch was bold, a real estate project promising high returns, boutique condominiums in prime locations, early access for premium investors. Every detail had been crafted to perfection. She wore success like a second skin now, gliding through rehearsals with a smile that made people believe she was the real deal. The money she had stolen, the lies she had woven, all of it was fueling her next big scam. She stood in that conference room like a queen addressing her court, completely unaware that the story was about to shift in a direction she could never control. I arrived just before the presentation began, slipping through the side entrance unnoticed, dressed in a plain suit, no theatrics, no entourage. I didn't need a spotlight, I brought something far more powerful. In my hand was a flash drive, small and unassuming, but loaded with everything I had gathered over the past few months. Emails, call logs, surveillance footage, falsified documents, all organized and time-stamped, ready to speak louder than any accusation. I moved quietly through the room, watching her work the crowd, shaking hands, laughing softly, offering promises she had no intention of keeping. I could see the pride in her posture, the confidence in her voice, the performance so perfect it could almost fool me again, if I hadn't known what it cost. I waited until she was deep into her pitch, explaining projected returns and timelines, charming every set of eyes in the room. Then, when the moment was right, I walked up to the AV table, nodded at the technician, and handed him the drive. "Play this," I said, calm and firm. He looked confused, hesitated, but did as I asked. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered. And in the blink of an eye, Lena's empire began to crack. The room hushed the moment the video began to play. At first, the investors thought it was part of Lena's presentation, maybe some polished promotional clip. But as the first frame filled the screen, their expressions began to shift. It wasn't a real estate portfolio or a glossy drone shot of property developments. It was grainy home surveillance footage, time-stamped and raw. There was Lena, caught in crisp detail, entering my house late at night, her movements deliberate, cautious, yet eerily composed. Then came Ethan, trailing behind her, his face clearly visible as they pulled back the hidden wall panel in our bedroom. A few quiet gasps rippled through the room as the footage showed them hauling out the safe, grinning, whispering to each other as if they were carrying a prize they'd earned. The angle shifted to the entryway camera, where Ethan turned toward Lena and laughed. "Told you he'd never see it coming," he said. "He's too busy playing Mr. Responsible to notice what's right in front of him." Lena smirked, her voice sharp and smug. "He thinks that money is for our future. He has no idea he just handed us our escape plan." That line landed like a punch. The audience stiffened. Chairs creaked. A few heads turned toward Lena, whose once glowing smile had now drained into blank panic. The video cut to the second part, a screen recording of email exchanges, clearly displayed with names, dates, and digital fingerprints. Lena and Ethan discussing fabricated bank statements, plotting how to redirect suspicion, and crafting the narrative that I had been laundering money through a shell company. One email even detailed a plan to anonymously tip off authorities and destroy my reputation before I could defend myself. Another showed a spreadsheet tracking projected investor funds from the very people now sitting in that room. "Keep the promises vague," Ethan had written. "We just need the first wave to buy in. Once we're out, they won't catch on until we're 2 countries away." It was no longer just betrayal, it was fraud, conspiracy, and premeditated theft, all laid bare on a massive screen, in front of the very people she was trying to swindle. The murmurs turned into whispers, the whispers into outrage. Some stood up abruptly, stepping away from their chairs in disbelief. One man near the front turned to Lena and muttered, "Is this some kind of joke?" But Lena wasn't moving. Her face had frozen into a mask of disbelief and humiliation. The screen kept cycling through evidence, bank transfers, text messages, audio recordings. Everything she had tried so carefully to bury was now on display, dissected in real time like a public autopsy of her lies. No one was asking questions anymore. They didn't need answers. The proof was right there, undeniable, damning. One by one, the investors began to leave. Some walked out quietly, others shaking their heads, cursing under their breath. The room that had once buzzed with Lena's curated energy now hung in tense silence, broken only by the sound of the final clip, Lena, sipping wine on a balcony, turning to Ethan with a laugh. "I almost feel bad for him," she said. Almost. And that was the last nail. The screen went dark. The silence that followed was louder than any accusation I could have made. I didn't need to say a word. Everything they needed to know had already spoken for me. The room erupted in chaos. Some investors demanded answers on the spot, their voices rising with fury, while others simply grabbed their things and stormed out, shaking their heads in disbelief. One older gentleman, clearly one of the major backers, slammed his folder shut and pointed directly at Lena. "You'll be hearing from my attorneys before sunset," he snapped, his voice vibrating with rage. Another woman, who had been beaming moments earlier while taking notes during Lena's pitch, now glared with a look of betrayal so sharp it could cut glass. Phones started ringing, whispers turned into open arguments, and someone even began recording the scene on their device, likely to preserve the fallout for legal proceedings. The illusion Lena had built so carefully was crumbling by the second, every brick of her fake empire falling in a rush of shame and panic. The hotel staff, sensing something had gone terribly wrong, stood at the doors confused, watching the chaos unfold with wide eyes. Lena stood frozen at the front of the room, her mouth slightly parted, but no words came. Her carefully curated confidence, her charm, her polished presence, it was all gone. Stripped away in a matter of minutes by cold, hard evidence and her own recorded arrogance. She tried to speak, reaching out to one of the investors in a last-ditch attempt to salvage the wreckage, but he recoiled instantly, muttering something about being fooled by a con artist. And then it spread, rumors, calls to lawyers, group messages fired off in panic. Within hours, social media caught wind of it, whispers turning into headlines. The same circles that once praised her were now dragging her name through the mud, and her business accounts were quickly being flagged for fraud. Her empire didn't just stumble, it collapsed in full view of the world she once fooled. And all she could do was stand there, watching the ashes fall, realizing the empire she stole had never truly been hers. Ethan didn't last much longer. With the mountain of evidence I'd handed over, including wire transfer records, audio clips, and forged documents traced directly to his IP address, it didn't take the authorities long to find him. He was picked up less than 48 hours later in a rented apartment across town, reportedly packing his bags with 2 fake passports in his suitcase. The arrest was swift, clean, and unceremonious. He didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't even deny it. When they brought him in, he reportedly said, "I guess this was bound to happen." News of his arrest hit just as Lena's investors were preparing lawsuits, only accelerating the collapse of everything they'd built together. With both of them exposed and their trail of manipulation unraveling fast, there was nowhere left for either of them to hide. While the public fallout continued to unravel around her, there was still one moment left that I needed, not for the world, not for revenge, but for myself. I needed to look her in the eyes, one last time, not to yell or demand answers, but to give her what she never gave me, clarity. A private meeting was arranged at her attorney's office, a sterile, windowless room where even the furniture felt uncomfortable. She walked in looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. No designer dress, no smug grin, just a hollow version of the woman who once stood so tall in her own illusion. Her eyes darted nervously toward mine, searching for the version of me she once knew, the naive husband, the quiet man she thought would crumble. But he wasn't there anymore. I stayed composed, my voice steady as I addressed her, nothing theatrical, just facts laid bare. "It's over," I said simply. "There's no angle left, no card you haven't played, and nowhere left to run." She tried to speak, to salvage dignity from the wreckage, but her words were thin, forced, falling apart before they left her lips. She wasn't just cornered legally, she was emotionally bankrupt, finally facing the weight of everything she had done without a single place left to deflect it. I opened my briefcase and placed 2 folders on the table, side by side. One was thick, heavy, filled with police reports, financial evidence, witness statements, everything needed to press full charges and ensure a courtroom ending. The other was slimmer, containing a one-way plane ticket to a small coastal town under a different name, along with documents relinquishing all claims to my assets, my estate, and my life. "This is your choice," I said. "Take the ticket, disappear, and this ends quietly. Or I file everything in that folder and make sure you spend years answering for every lie you've ever told." She looked between them, her hands trembling. For the first time, the decision wasn't hers to control, it was mine. She stared at the folders for a long time, as if hoping one would disappear and spare her from making a choice. Her fingers hovered over the plane ticket first, tracing the edge of the envelope, then pulled back like she'd touched fire. Her eyes flicked toward the thick folder, the one with her entire web of lies laid out in cold, unforgiving ink. Her breath caught, her face pale, jaw tightening as she tried to summon the defiance that once came so easily to her. But it wasn't there anymore. Whatever power she thought she had, whatever version of herself she believed was untouchable, it had all crumbled. Eventually, she reached forward and slid the slim folder toward her. She opened it without a word, and her eyes landed on the one-way ticket. Her fingers clenched around it like it was her last lifeline. No tears, no apology, just a bitter acceptance of the truth. She signed the documents in silence, her hand trembling slightly, and pushed them back across the table without looking at me. The meeting ended with nothing more than a nod. No farewell, no final confrontation. Just a broken woman retreating from the ruins of everything she'd tried to steal. That was her exit, not a grand escape, but a quiet fall from a throne she was never meant to sit on. After she walked out, I sat alone in that cold, quiet room for a while, letting the silence settle in. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt instead was something far more complicated. I thought about everything I'd lost: trust, time, peace. I thought about the love I gave so freely, the years I poured into someone who saw me not as a partner, but as a stepping stone. I thought about how betrayal doesn't just come with theft, it comes with erosion, the slow chipping away of your sense of self. But I also thought about what I'd kept. My dignity. My strength. My sanity. The ability to look in the mirror and know that I hadn't let their lies define me. I hadn't become bitter, just wiser. And in a world where people wear masks too easily, holding on to your integrity is a kind of wealth no one can steal. The months that followed weren't about celebration, they were about rebuilding, quietly and purposefully. I didn't care to flaunt a victory that left me feeling more grounded than victorious. But I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let this experience just fade into a private lesson. It had to mean something more. I started a restitution fund, not something flashy, not a public charity with photo ops and press releases. Just a discreet, functional support system for men who had gone through the same kind of betrayal I did. Men who'd lost everything in silence, who were too ashamed to speak up, too broken to start over, too isolated to ask for help. I funded legal consultations, therapy sessions, financial coaching, tools that could make a difference in someone's darkest hour. It wasn't about revenge. It was about giving power back to people who had been stripped of it. Because I knew what that felt like. And I knew that sometimes, all a man needs is someone to say, "I've been there too, and you're not alone." Ray came over one evening not long after everything had settled. We sat on the back porch with a couple of cold beers, watching the sunset like we used to before life got complicated. Neither of us said much at first. There was comfort in the quiet, in knowing we didn't need to fill the space with anything unnecessary. After a while, he turned to me and said, "You did more than fight back. You changed the whole damn narrative." I nodded, the words sinking in. "I didn't want to be just another story of a guy who got screwed over and disappeared," I said. He raised his bottle and tapped it against mine. "You're not. You're the story of the guy who took the hit, and stood back up stronger than anyone expected. We sat in that fading light, two friends bound not by shared success, but by scars, resilience, and a quiet kind of strength that no storm could ever shake loose. The more distance I put between myself and the wreckage Lena left behind, the clearer my purpose became. The money, once a symbol of security and sacrifice, now served a different role. I didn't want to just sit on it or build walls around it. I wanted it to build something that would outlive the pain. I started volunteering at a local outreach center that offered mentorship programs for young men, some from broken homes, some just lost, others trying to find their way after being chewed up by life too early. I didn't walk in with a savior complex or try to play the wise elder. I just listened. I shared what I'd learned the hard way, that trust should never be blind, that self-worth doesn't come from someone else's approval, and that being a good man doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. I helped them navigate their first jobs, their first breakups, their financial decisions, and their growing pains. I told them the truth about love, loyalty, and what it really means to rebuild after being knocked flat on your back. And in doing that, I found something I didn't expect: peace. Not the kind that comes from silence or solitude, but the kind that comes from knowing your story, even the painful parts, can be someone else's lifeline. It didn't erase what happened, but it gave it meaning. And sometimes, meaning is more valuable than closure. I no longer carried the betrayal like a wound. I carried it like armor. One evening, I stood alone on the ridge behind my house, the sun dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the field below. The air was still, the kind of stillness that makes you feel every breath, every heartbeat. I looked out into that open space and realized that for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel haunted, I felt grounded. Stronger not because I won, but because I refused to let betrayal be the final word in my story. Life had tested me in the cruelest way, but I met it with silence, with strategy, with resolve. And as I stood there watching the last light of day fade into dusk, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be, not broken, not bitter, but whole. If the person you trusted most betrayed you, would you fight back in anger, or rise in silence with purpose? It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer, not when the pain cuts as deep as betrayal from someone you let into your heart and your home. Most people think revenge is loud, explosive, a scream into the world demanding justice. But sometimes, the most powerful response isn't noise, it's strategy. It's restraint. It's building a life so solid, so grounded in truth, that no lie can tear it down again. So ask yourself, when faced with loss, would you burn everything down, or build something better from the ashes? Sometimes, the people who leave you broken are actually handing you the tools to rebuild stronger. Not because they intended to help you, but because their destruction exposed your foundation, and forced you to reinforce it with wisdom, not just hope. Pain has a way of sharpening perspective. It teaches you who you are when everything else falls apart. And when you learn to rise quietly, deliberately, with clarity and purpose, that's not just healing, it's transformation. You no longer carry the betrayal as a scar, you wear it like armor. And the best part is, you don't need them to see your strength. You feel it in your own bones. You live it in your every step. That's the real victory. Not proving them wrong, but proving to yourself that nothing, and no one, can take away the strength you've earned. Because when you rebuild with wisdom, that's a victory no one can ever steal again.